This is the big picture overview of using grants to fund projects. Writing each section of a grant is a very detailed task. These icons here on this slide represent the typical sections of a grant proposal. Before you look for a grant, these are the questions that you need to ask yourself. What are your needs? How have you quantified and documented your needs? And with which funding agency's missions are your needs aligned? There are different risk levels associated with different types of grant-funded initiatives. When we talk about enhancing a current program, we're looking at a low-risk strategy. This involves refining and improving programs that are already in place and functioning. The infrastructure is there, the outcomes are known, and the modifications are typically incremental. Moving to expanding current programs increases the risk to a medium level. Here we're talking about existing programs and scaling them up. This might mean serving more participants or extending the program's reach. This risk is higher because expansion often requires new resources, broader stakeholder engagement, and possibly untested modifications to the model. The highest level of risk comes with initiating new programs. Starting from scratch means facing the unknowns of a new program design, implementation, and evaluation. So it's crucial that you understand these risk levels as you plan your grant strategy, because each level not only carries a different potential for impact, but also different requirements for planning, resources, and risk management. Consider the different kinds of grants. There's federal grants, which are typically substantial and have specific guidelines. They're a solid foundation for funding, but they can be highly competitive. State grants, on the other hand, might offer more specialized opportunities and could align closely with local priorities and needs. Private foundations are another avenue for grants. These can range from large, well-known entities to smaller family-run foundations. These come with their own set of interests and funding patterns. Don't overlook corporate grants either. Companies often fund initiatives that align with their business goals or corporate social responsibility objectives. And lastly, you might explore community grants, which can be less competitive and offer strong local support for your initiatives. But remember, each one of these funding sources has its own application process, own reporting requirements, and funding cycles. So it's crucial to understand these elements and align them with your organization's capacity and goals. If you cast a wide enough net, you can maximize your chances of securing the right grants for your projects. Here's an example of a foundation website, and you can see they tell what they will fund, what their interests are, what their initiatives are. Pay attention to things like the detailed application guidelines, eligibility criteria. Always check that first because you may not be eligible to be funded by them. Look for deadlines, what the review process is, and a lot of information. And you might start like a spreadsheet or a database of information about the grants that you're actually interested in. If you're looking to build the capacity of your agency for grant writing, you should start a file where you keep a list of funding sources that you have identified from all of those different categories, and then what the different grants are that would be appropriate for your projects, and timelines of their funding cycles. Once you have done these things, you've identified and quantified and documented your needs, you found funding agencies with missions aligned to your needs, you found a proposal that would be a good fit, then talk to the staff that would implement the program if it gets funded. Do they want to implement it? And do they have the capacity to implement it? Okay, you've done all those things. Then do this reality check before you start. Ask yourself, what are the odds that a well-written, competitive grant would be funded? And to answer that question, you need to know how many grants are going to be awarded, how many letter of intents were submitted if that's required, and how many hours is it going to take to write this grant. And it can take an experienced professional grant writer 100 hours to write a large federal grant. Here's a reality check example. The Race to the Top district grants that were available several years ago, they had a detailed list of school districts that submitted their letter of intent, meaning that they intended to apply for this, and that was made public. There were 893 school districts that intended to apply, and they were going to award between 15 and 20 grants nationally, and they would not award them all in one state. They probably would not give more than 1 or 2 to North Carolina, for example. 35 North Carolina school districts sent letters of intent. So what are the odds that you're going to win this, given that you have a good competitive grant? And the odds of winning this grant would be about 1.6%. And then how many hours is it going to take to write? That grant would have taken about 200 people hours to write. And then you ask yourself, is this going to be worth it? So don't apply if the odds are low and there's a tremendous amount of work required. And make sure it's a good fit. And sometimes there's not as much work because you have built resources. And every grant you write is easier than the last one because you can build on what you've already done. I can't stress this enough, but I've seen a lot of people think that it's okay to not follow the application rules. Eligibility, format, content, and deadline. You've got to follow those directions. If you don't, and it's a state or federal grant, they're not even going to read it. As you build your capacity to write grants, you build resources and you reuse narrative. You also will have templates for logic models, budget templates for the different funding sources. You can reuse the tables that you've created. It gets easier and easier the more grants you've written. So to prepare to apply for a grant, determine your tax status and obtain documentation. Sometimes you have to submit that with a grant application. Make sure you've got your DUNS, your CCR, SAM. I think they changed the name of SAM recently, but you might need those numbers if you're applying for a federal grant. If you don't know what they are, look them up and make sure that you've got them. You need your key staff members' resumes, current list of board of directors and their affiliations. Audited financial statements might be required, maybe not, but if you need them, make sure you've got them. You need an organizational chart, and let everybody know what you're going to need from them and when you're going to need it, because you'll need people to give you their resumes, and if they haven't given it to you and you've got 1 hour before you have to submit, you're in trouble. So, make sure, give everybody a timeline what you're going to need from them. You need letters of support and various things. Position yourself or your agency to be better prepared to apply for grants. Do things like document your volunteer hours in standard ways and have them on file. Quantify and document your needs and have clear beliefs, vision, and mission statements on which your goals are based. This will make it easier to make your case when you design a program that's consistent with them. Here's an example of how you might align all of these things that would help you look for money that you're more likely to get. You might have these beliefs, vision, and mission statements that you believe all students should have access to the most rigorous STEM courses and be supported for success. All students will graduate prepared for college or the 21st century careers, and our mission is to prepare students for successful lives in the 21st century. So let's say those are your beliefs, vision, mission. Your goal is all students will be career and college ready, and you might want a grant for a program that aligns with those things, like personalized learning, support using technology, teach parents to advocate, mentors to advise students to take the most rigorous courses available, high expectations and rigorous training for the teachers. And who funds this kind of thing? Well, Golden Leaf, National Science Foundation, Department of Ed, Department of Defense. All sorts of people would fund this. And see how this all kind of aligns? And then you look for the funding agencies that their mission aligns with those things. A lot of grants call for collaborations, and know who your partners are. Check them out on GuideStar. If you're a school system and you're going to collaborate with a nonprofit, go check out the nonprofit on GuideStar. There are agencies that profit inordinately and give very little in return, and they use groups or school systems that serve low-income and minority children because it helps them get grants. And we have seen this as program evaluators for 30 years. It doesn't matter how prestigious or well-known the collaborating partner might be. You need to be sure that you understand what benefits your agency is going to get, and it's what the target population will get from collaborating with a partner. Write the grant as if you might get it. Just assume that you're going to get it. And always keep in mind as you're writing it, if we get it, how will we do this? You need the capacity to implement what you're doing, and you need the capacity to evaluate it. Don't write things into the grant like that you're going to measure success with data that doesn't exist or data you don't have access to. Make sure that you have the partnerships to be able to get the data that you're going to need for accountability. And keep these underlying assumptions in mind. Always just assume you might get this grant and you're going to have to do what you said you were going to do. So that is the big picture overview of how to build your capacity to use grant funding for your agency.